Welcome to Roll for Insight, the D&D podcast where we dive into the game, the lore, and the internet's favorite arguments. Grab your dice and your character sheet, and let's roll for insight. Hello, welcome to Roll for Insight. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the spell Hold Person of the 2024 D&D Player's Handbook. So, Hold Person is a level 2 enchantment spell for the Bard, Cleric, Druid, Sorcerer, Warlock, and Wizard classes. And this one is a classic control spell, and when it lands, it can completely take a creature out of the fight. So in this episode, we'll be covering the description of the spell from the Player's Handbook. We'll review some gameplay uses and examples you can bring to your table for how to use the spell. We'll get some ideas and opinions from the internet. And last, we'll end with some fun fact information about the spell. Okay, first topic, the spell details. This is a level 2 enchantment spell for the Bard, Cleric, Druid, Sorcerer, Warlock, and Wizard classes. The casting time is 1 action. The range is 60 feet. The components are verbal, somatic, and material. The material component is a straight piece of iron, and the duration is concentration up to 1 minute. Choose a humanoid that you can see within range. The target must succeed on a wisdom saving throw or have the paralyzed condition for the duration. At the end of each of its turns, the target repeats the save, ending the spell on itself on a success. Using a higher level spell slot, you can target 1 additional humanoid for each spell slot level above 2. Okay, so some clarifications on the spell. This one is basically you attempt to completely lock down a humanoid target. Now, first off, let's talk about that target restriction. This is very important. It only affects humanoids. Now, examples of valid targets now are things like the playable races, like dwarves, elves, humans, tieflings, and they might be bandits or guards or cultists or enemy adventurers or NPCs. One of the big changes is that a lot of the monsters and creatures in D&D have been reclassified in this version. So in previous editions of D&D, you could target creatures like gnolls and goblins and kobolds, because they were under the humanoid classification, but now a lot of them have been changed into things like aberrations and fae and dragon types. So a lot of the targets that do not qualify now are things like the undead creatures, the beasts, the fiends, elementals, constructs. None of those count, and a lot of the ones that used to be humanoids are now reclassified. So that limitation is pretty large, and it can be overlooked. Now, when we're looking at the saving throw here, the wisdom saving throw means that if you fail, you're paralyzed, and if you succeed, then nothing happens. So this is one of those classic save or suck spells. Now, the target is also able to repeat the save at the end of each turn, and that means this is not permanent control, but it does give you a huge window of opportunity to act. Now, let's talk about the paralyzed condition, because that's what makes Hold Person so powerful. Now, with the effects of being paralyzed, that means that the target is incapacitated, and that means there's no actions, no bonus actions, no reactions, and concentration automatically ends. It also means if you're paralyzed that you have a speed of 0, you can't move, you automatically fail strength and dexterity saving throws, attack rolls against them have advantage, and any attacks that hit within 5 feet is a critical hit automatically. So why this is so devastating? The target is completely shut down. They can't act, they can't move, they can't defend themselves, and most importantly, they're extremely vulnerable to massive amounts of damage. So let's shift into gameplay uses here, and let's talk about where Hold Person becomes one of the most dangerous spells when it lands. So you can lock down a high value target. So a couple examples here. Let's say you target the enemy leader or a caster or the strongest melee fighter. They fail to save, they're removed from the fight completely. Now the rest of the party can move in on a weakened encounter. If the enemy captain was coordinating and the group suddenly freezes them in place, well, now there's no commands, no reactions, no leadership coming from that enemy captain. If you have an enemy wizard who's about to cast a big spell, but is now completely shut down before their turn even comes up, instead of fighting a coordinated group, now you're fighting a disorganized one. So you're effectively turning a 4-on-4 into a 4-on-3 instantly. Now, the other side of this is setting up critical hits, and this is a huge part too. So as an example, let's say you land your hold person spell and you paralyze the enemy. Now your melee allies can move in and every hit becomes a guaranteed critical hit. A rogue lands a sneak attack crit, the fighter can unload multiple crits in one turn with extra attacks, the enemy can go basically from full health to 0 in a single round. The rogue can walk up and roll sneak attack, and now it's double damage on all the dice. The fighter can use action surge and land 3 to 4 attacks, all of them crits. The paladin can land a define smite crit, doubling both the weapon dice and the smite dice. What would normally take several rounds to kill gets compressed into one turn. Now you can also use hold person to break enemy casters. So enemy spellcasters, if they're holding a concentration spell, you can cast hold person, they fail their save, then immediately that concentration ends. So you've shut down both the caster and their spell that's active. And that can drastically change the battlefield sometimes. Maybe a wall drops, maybe a summons disappears, or a buff ends, but the caster loses their turn entirely and can't respond to it. So now your party has a full round or sometimes more to dealing with that threat. So this can really turn the tide in a fight here. Like if the party is really struggling, enemies are overwhelming you, if you land a hold person on one or more of them, well, now the enemy is removed, your team has an advantage in the upper hand, you start getting momentum, and that enemy that was dealing the most damage is suddenly gone from the action economy. So your team can either focus down another enemy or the paralyzed one. You can make that choice. The fight flips from we're losing to we're doing okay now in one round. So you give your team a little bit of breathing room for things like healing, repositioning, or regrouping so you can take this fight on. Now, when we're looking at upcasting it too, you can target multiple humanoids. So you can paralyze 2, 3, 4 enemies at once. Now your party controls the battlefield completely and not just one enemy. So 2 frontliners can freeze in place, and that leaves a huge gap in the enemy line. Your party can isolate the remaining enemies and deal with them one at a time, and your melee characters can split up and each take advantage of a paralyzed target. So instead of one opening, you've got multiple opportunities all at once. Now, one of the most important strategies to landing your hold person spells, though, you have to target the weak saves. So your target enemies that typically rely on things like the strength, the dexterity, the constitution, typically those are the enemies who are going to have the weaker wisdom saves. So that's things like the fighters, the barbarians, sometimes rogues. You need to exploit their weakest defense. The heavily armored knight with a high armor class and tons of hit points suddenly fails a wisdom save and they're completely helpless. You can drop that enemy. The barbarian who's putting out massive damage is now locked in place and they can't rage effectively either. So really, when the spell works, it ends fights. Right? The boss fails their save, your party focuses them down with crits for a couple rounds, the fight is effectively over before it really starts. Because maybe now the boss doesn't get their big opening turn, or the party can surround them and unload everything at once, and by the time they get a chance for another save, they might already be close to defeated or already there. Now, on the flip side here, keep in mind when not to use it. Now, this depends on the table as well. Sometimes DMs will give leniency for targeting creatures and let you know if what you are targeting is not humanoid, but not always. So against non-humanoids, the spell does nothing. It will simply fail. And against high wisdom enemies, they're more likely to resist. You also might want to rethink using this if it's already late in combat when the enemies are already low on health, because then you're risking wasting your action and your concentration. So, hold person, it's not specifically about dealing damage with the spell itself, it's about opening up the opportunities for your party to do that for you. Now, let's take a look at the benefits and limitations here just broadly. Now, benefits-wise, it is an extremely powerful control effect. It gives you those automatic, guaranteed critical hits, and it really shuts down enemy actions because it breaks concentration and it can scale to multiple targets. So it's definitely one of the most impactful level 2 spells when it lands. Now, limitations-wise, it only affects humanoids, and the list of humanoids is now quite limited. It also requires concentration, so it is competing with other concentration spells, and that wisdom save that negates the effect entirely, you have to be careful about who you target with this. The target also gets to repeat saves each turn, so it is a very high reward but not guaranteed type of spell. Now let's flip over to the internet discussions and opinions here. This is a really popular example of save or suck design. So it's a common discussion about what spells would fall under this category, but it's either it works and it's amazing, or it fails and it does nothing. But a lot of people point out that this spell, when it does land, can end encounters completely. Against the right targets, this spell is absolutely devastating. And that's why that humanoid restriction really keeps it balanced now too, being a level 2 spell. It is the biggest limiter of this spell. A lot of powerful enemies are not humanoids, and it limits the usefulness of the spell. And that leaves some room for the higher level hold spells as well, like Hold Monster, to come into play later and be useful. So it really does reward the smart targeting as a level 2 spell here. Alright, now let's end on some fun fact information here. So the material component for Hold Person is a straight piece of iron. Now, historically, iron is associated with things like jail cells and restraints and bindings and handcuffs. And in folklore, iron was believed to do things like suppress magic and bind supernatural creatures and hold things in place. There is that magical interpretation of iron, and it really fits nicely with the paralyzing the target in place. A lot of folklore connections too. There's a lot of traditions where iron chains or iron rods were specifically used to do things like bind spirits and restrain magical beings too. So thematically, as a material component, it fits really well, and it carries forward to the level 5 Hold Monster spell too. Well, that's it for this session of Roll for Insight. Thanks for listening, and thank you to all our supporters on patreon.com/rollforinsightpodcast. And we will see you next time.